Anyway, joining us now, Senator Tom Coburn and Mark Meckler are with us. They're leading the charge against federal overreach, and they're calling on Congress to cut wasteful billions of dollars from their budget. Senator Coburn is known for his waste book in the Senate. He believes that, as I do, Washington is fundamentally broken. He's leading the call for an Article 5 convention of the states to return power to the people away from Washington. And by the way, Senator, that's the great one, Mark Levin's book in the Liberty Amendments. How are you?
I am fine. Great to be with you. Great to hear your voice.
Did you read Levin's book?
I did.
And so you'd basically agree with Mark that this is a way that people can take back power.
Well, it's the only way that our founders, who were visionary, gave us that we can actually control. Sean, I served 16 years in Washington under every combination of Republican, Democrat, president, or Congress. Washington's never going to give up its power. And what they've done is abused and usurped the power that our founders gave them.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is take it back. And if we don't take it back, then our future isn't very bright. If we do, then we'll control our future and we'll control the problems in terms of our liberty that has been diminished.
See, I've never quite understood. I mean, even Democrats as recently as this weekend and last week were whining over sequestration. Sequestration doesn't bring us to a balanced budget, Senator. And the Republicans plan to keep sequestration in place. You know, their plan to balance the budget happens 9 years down the road. For me, it's not soon enough. And I've been a big believer that you've got to eliminate baseline budgeting and maybe cut a penny out of every dollar that Washington spends, and I mean across the board, and live within your means. But I guess I'm in the minority here.
Well, I'll tell you, Sean, you hit it on. I outlined over $400 billion of waste, duplication, or fraud every year. Nobody disputed, but nobody helped me get rid of it. $400 billion, all right? So that's more than a penny. You know, that's 10 pennies. And they haven't done it, and they're not about to do it. They're not about to get rid of it. And sequestration is a drop in the bucket to the waste that's going on.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to give up the power because all this waste has a constituency, a friend that will give them a campaign donation or will help them do something in terms of their political career. And so we won't get rid of the waste, the fraud, and the duplication. But we have seen some changes. I mean, we've seen some changes when we actually highlight it, and people like you highlight it, like the Social Security disability fraud and all that is going on. We've seen that come down.
Mark, let me go to you. You've been crisscrossing the country now in support of this initiative to change the Constitution, and you're saying that it can start in the states, that it's gaining traction. This all started with, as I pointed out, Levin's book, the Liberty Amendments, and in other words, proposing amendments to the Constitution through Article 5. Explain it.
Well, Article 5 of the Constitution, the second clause, gives us, the people, the right to call for a convention to propose amendments. The history is really important because on the second to last day of the convention in 1787, Colonel George Mason from Virginia stood up and said, "We have a fundamental problem with the document we've drafted. We've given Congress the power to propose amendments to restrain itself, but we've not given that power to the people through the states. And are we really so naive that we'll believe that the federal government will restrain itself when it becomes a tyranny?" It was so obvious back then, Sean, just like you heard the senator describe now. D.C. was not going to restrain itself then. It's not going to restrain itself now. Thank God the founders gave us the power through Article 5 to impose those restraints. And so we've got a project called conventionofstates.com that the senator and I are working on, which is to call this convention. There are three things we're calling for. One is a discussion of fiscal restraints on Washington, D.C. The second is a discussion of limiting the scope and jurisdiction of Washington, D.C. And the third is to impose term limits on federal officials. That would be Congress and could possibly include the federal judiciary. All things suggested, as you said, by Mark Levin, who himself endorses this project and serves on our legal board of reference.
I've endorsed it since his book came out. And what I'm really happy about, and it's a tribute to Mark, is that a number of state legislatures have now gone along with this. Now, you need 2/3 of legislators. If they request a national convention to consider these new amendments, ratification would still require, 3/4 approval from the state legislatures, but you need 2/3 to start. So where are you in the process?
So where we at is we've been going for about 18 months. We have Georgia, Florida, and Alaska have all approved, so which is great. You've got a red state, sort of a frontier mentality state. Those are kind of like the mountain states. And then Florida, which is a swing state, have all approved it, all big states. We've got legislation that's been introduced in excess of 30 states around the country right now. Folks can track that at conventionofstates.com. And so we're making great progress. Never before in the history of the country have 30 states introduced identical language calling for a convention at one time.
Well, I would like to see this. Now, you've also been, as you've been crisscrossing, how many states now have you been to?
Personally, I'm headed to Iowa today, right after this call, as a matter of fact, and I think that will be my 29th state that I've been in the last 12 months.
Mm-hmm. So, and what has the reception been among the state legislatures?
The reception is extraordinary. We've got strong sponsors in all of those state legislatures, so it's really positive. There is opposition as well, and interestingly, you've got opposition groups on the far right, like the John Birch Society, who William F. Buckley and Reagan and Goldwater all chased out of the legitimate conservative movement decades ago in the 60s, but they're raising their ugly head again, and they are actually now aligned with Soros-funded groups. It's really interesting bedfellows. Same folks, by the way, who stopped a convention back in the late 70s around the balanced budget amendment when our debt stood at a relatively paltry $1.7 trillion.
All right, so let me ask, Senator, you know how slow the wheels of democracy work, if you will. How realistic is it that this can happen? Because you know how difficult it is to get a constitutional amendment.
Sure. I think it's difficult, but look, the answer that I have to everybody that challenges this is, how else are we going to take back our country? There's nobody that listens to your show that doesn't think we're in trouble, Sean.
That's true.
Everybody knows we're in trouble. So the question is, right now you have a runaway convention with the Supreme Court not paying attention to the Constitution, with the President not paying attention to the Constitution, and Congress giving its full duties and its responsibilities up to bureaucracy. So we're in a position now that we have a tough slog to go, but I think we can achieve it. I think this country will be the first republic to truly cheat history and not die over fiscal issues. But the citizens...
But aren't we very close? I mean, let's be real here. Isn't America in many ways now, hasn't it evolved into the socialist economy that Europe now has fallen into and that the rest of the world has fallen into? I mean, we really can't make an argument that our government is big, bureaucratic, bloated, waste, fraud, abuse, entitlements. You know, it's to the point now, I don't know how you overcome an $18 trillion debt and $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities. I'm not sure. I mean, I think oil is a big part of the answer. Energy is a big part of the answer. But you're also going to have to restrain spending at some point, and there seems to be no appetite for that.
That's right. That's right. And, well, you have to go back. There was a book written about 20 years ago called The Tragedy of American Compassion, where we abandoned the way we used to help people, and we said the government, just as you suggested, will come in and be that solution. And so what's happened is the nuclear family's been destroyed by the government, not by individuals, but by undermining personal responsibility and self-reliance. So can we change the culture? Can we do these things? Can we speak about those issues and say, if we don't, here's what you're doing now to these children. And we can document $140 trillion in unfunded liabilities, Sean. $140 trillion if you use generally accepted accounting principles. It's not possible for it to happen.
All right,
we need leadership to be truthful with where we are.
Mark, let me give you a push if people want to join this movement. I'm a big supporter of it. I like what you're doing. I hope you can get this accomplished. I think it would be great. I do have one little fear in this equation, and that is if the left tries to use an opening for a constitutional convention to advance their agenda that would render the Constitution meaningless, that would be a problem for me.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable thing to talk about, but it's also important to remember the realities, and Mark does a great job of dealing with this in his book, The Liberty Amendments. But let's just start at the bottom line, Sean. 38 states have to ratify any amendment. What comes out of a convention are merely suggestions or proposals. And if you look at where the political playing field sits today, we've got 31 state legislatures. It includes Nebraska unicameral that are controlled by Republicans. Everything's trending that way. We have more Republican governors than ever before. We have more Republican houses controlled by Republicans since any time since the 1920s. You have less Democrats in state legislatures since any time since the Civil War. So the idea that you could get 38 states to ratify something that would take away our liberty, it's just not realistic. And to do the math in the converse, which is even more powerful, it takes only one house in each of the 13 most conservative states in the United States to stop anything. And I would say, with you on board and Mark Levin and Rush has talked in favor of Article 5, Sarah Palin, all these people, the senator, there's no way anything that restricts our liberties could make it past the 13 most conservative states in the country.
Yeah, all right. And where do people go if they want to join on?
People go to conventionofstates.com, and there they can send petitions to their own legislators around the country. They can get involved. They can become a district captain. They can help Senator Coburn and I go around the country, talk to people, speak about this. They can be part of the generation that saves liberty in America. Conventionofstates.com.
All right, Mark, thank you. Senator Coburn, I hope you're feeling better, by the way. Thank you for being with us.
Great.
Are you doing well? Oh, good. I'm glad.
I am.